I'm going to talk about constraints. And as you can see in Maya, we know that if we want to grab a bunch of points, we can attach them to an object very easily. So how would we go about this in Vellum? So if I go into Vellum and I press the up arrow, we can see that our object will just fall to the floor. So I'm going to press Control and up arrow again just to set my playback time back. So how do I deal with something like this in Vellum? And this is where constraints come in. Now, constraints are the backbone of how everything is calculated as a system here in Vellum. So we have the Vellum solver, which is going to calculate the environment and gravity and all of that, but the constraint is basically the way that everything is connected. So if we want to control the constraint, we need to do a couple of things. So first, let's just understand how these nodes are built. So if I press Control B, just to make this one big thing so we can zoom in. So if we look here at this setup that I have here, where it's a basic setup, where I have my sim geo on this side and my collider on this side, you can see they piped into my Vellum cloth constraint over here. And this Vellum cloth has, all the attributes that I need to make a cloth, like I mentioned before. And you can see that I have these streams that go down all the way to the Vellum solver down here. So anything on the left is going to be our geometry, and everything on the right is going to be our collider. Anything in the middle stream is going to be our constraints. So if I click on it, and I'll press Control B again, you can see that we get this mesh-like object, which is our constraints. It's basically the same thing that we have in Maya, which is like particles that are all connected with springs. This is kind of on the same principle. Cool. Now, what's so interesting in Vellum is that they've taken this a step further. Instead of having a separate node that all it does is, choose points and you can do stuff to it, here I can control the entire system through these constraints. So if I grab these three over here and press Tab and write Vellum, you'll see that I have all of these options here. And the option that I'm most interested in, and the one that you're going to use probably the most, is this Vellum constraint. So the Vellum constraint itself is actually very versatile because you can, out of it, choose the different ways of constraining objects to each other or particles to each other, or you can group verts, faces, edges, or even objects together to give us different behaviors. We can actually create something to make it more gluey or sticky. We can stitch together. We can do a lot of stuff. Each one of these behaves in a different way. So if we look at the first two options over here, these are basically the equivalent to Maya's, if I go over here, to Maya's, let's just stop here, constraint will be to the component constraint. So the first two options over there will be probably the point constraint and a component constraint, a component to component constraint and a component constraint. We don't have something equivalent to the force field. We can do other things with that, but we'll talk about that in a different lesson altogether. You could tear stuff. You can do everything from the same constraint, which is basically what the constraints in Maya do. They're also just presets, really, of the constraint node. But in Vellum, it's slightly more complex than that. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to constrain between several points on the mesh here, and the collision object. And to do that, I'm just going to go down here to attach to geometry, and you'll see that all of my properties here are going to change. So if that's the case, then let's connect the pieces. So I don't want primitives. I will probably want points. It's going to be a lot easier. So as you can see, it says group type. The first one is basically which geometry, what parts of the geometry I want to constrain. By default, if I go here, you can see that every single point is now constrained to the collider object. Now, if I detach this here, I press down, I hold down Y, and then I cut. You could see that the collider object has disappeared. So if I reconnect it, you can see everything is connected. So how do I basically connect these points? Well, I can select a geo, parts of the geo, and then have those parts be constrained specifically. So I'm going to hold down space and press 4, and that's going to give me the side view. And then I'm going to go press this little arrow button over here. I'm going to drag over those top ones over there, and then space 1, and voila, I've chosen all of them. There's another way of doing this, just if you don't remember how. You hold down Shift, you hold down A, and then middle mouse click. If you go first one, second one, and then the third one, should select the entire row all the way around, and then press Enter, and you will see that now this is constrained, and I can press. Oop, I got to be on the right evaluator. And the reason you guys can see the constraints, let me just play just so you can see. So now it's basically behaving the way that it's expected. It's behaving in a different way than what we have in Maya, because the constraints are behaving that way. But all in all, this is how it's done. All right, I'm going to stop the video now. In the next video, I'm going to continue talking about constraints and different workflows and constraints and different ways to deal with the constraint properties.